as a digitizer, I often go through almost the same process with any design that I'm asked to digitize, and I wanted to share that process with you. Um, First of all, you need to get the graphic on screen, and there are a few ways to do that. Typically, I would have my image ready already. It's going to come in either via email or something like that. And typically it's going to be in some electronic format already. So all I really have to do is open it, get it on screen. If that wasn't available to me, I do have the ability to scan it directly into DesignShop. But then the next thing that I would do is I would size my graphic on screen to whatever size the actual sellout's going to be. Because so many of the decisions I make as a digitizer are based on the stitch length or the stitch line length, I need to really have that at actual size to make intelligent decisions about that. Then I really start to plan things out. So what I'll think about is background to foreground, because embroidery is so, or can be so very dimensional. That's definitely something that I consider very much. The sky in the background, and then whatever's in front of it, and then whatever's in front of that is kind of dictating the order in which I will sew, oftentimes. I will also consider thread colors. What am I sewing on? What am I trying to cover up? Typically, lighter thread colors don't cover up darker threads as easily as the other way around. So darker threads tend to cover up lighter threads a little bit more easily. If I'm overlapping things, that's something that definitely comes into my head. And then something else that I think of is pathing. How do I get from one place to another, and can I do it without a trim? If I can, great. Other parts that come into play with pathing that I definitely consider are push. How am I pushing that material? What direction are things going? Am I pushing away from an anchor point? Am I pushing away from things that I have sewn before? If I have, that's definitely going to help. If I'm pushing towards things that I've sewn already, then what can happen is I can start to push a ripple of material, and I'll end up either sewing in a crease or sewing in a ripple into my design, and I'd really like to avoid that because it gives me a much smoother sew out and a much nicer finish. After that, I typically consider my stitch types. So what do those different stitch types get me? Fills are typically used for larger areas. They tend to kind of fall back in space a little bit, where satin stitches save me stitches and tend to come forward a little bit. So for some of those background pieces, I might consider, like, the larger background pieces are probably going to be fill, and then anything in front of that may tend to be a satin, so that it comes forward a little bit. It's a little bit shinier, comes across. I think of the size range and what's appropriate as far as what stitch type I'm using. I typically will go across the form of something if I can swing it, and that too I will consider with my stitch direction and to some extent my stitch type. Then I will oftentimes set up my properties. Now, this can be done ahead of time, this can be done at the end of the design. I often kind of split things. I have a lot of defaults that I use all the time that are saved. So I have my tie stitches. My tie stitches, tie-ins and tie-offs are typically defaulted to on. Usually I use a style 1, so all of that's kind of set in my software. As the default, I don't have to think about it. And then if I find a reason that I need to change it, I can go into my software when I am dealing with my design afterwards and go into my properties and change those as I need to. So properties are something you can set up ahead of time. You can set them up after you're done. My problem with waiting till after you're done, honestly, it's not a problem for you if you remember to do it. I just don't always remember to do it. So then I will go to my final sew out, or my first sew out, not my final, definitely not my final. I'll go to my first sew out, sew it out, and nothing's the way that I meant it to be because I totally forgot to address my properties. So I have a lot of them set up ahead of time because I'm flaky and I forget. So up to you when you want to do it. Then you'll just go in and input all of your element types. Just that's kind of the meat of digitizing. And a lot of times, a lot of new digitizers or people that are starting out will just kind of jump right into that part. And because it's the most fun and it's where you get to do the most things. But without the earlier planning parts, you end up typically redoing a lot of that. So it's actually a lot of extra work to just jump straight into that. So I'll do that. Then after I get all my elements input, I will tend to finish up. I will hopefully remember to go in and adjust all of my properties to anything application specific. I'll center the design typically, not always, but almost always I will center my design. And then make sure that I have my tie stitches. Again, I have them on by default so that I don't forget, but if you don't have those as your default, make sure that you have some tie stitches before you sew, unless you're planning on ripping it out later or having it wash out later. It's a pretty good thing to have in there. Then I might adjust for push and pull a little bit with a little bit of pull offset, something like that. Make sure you've got good underlay under the pieces that need it. And then I will go and I will sew it out on my machine. And depending on how long it is and my attention span, I will try very hard to watch the whole thing sew out, or at least check in on it every now and then, because watching it sew out will help you see how that material's pushing, how is the material being stabilized with that underlay, what are my properties really doing to my design on the machine when I'm sewing it out. So that's super helpful. After I take it off the machine, my first sew out is rarely my last. Typically, I will bring it back to my computer, set it down, look at it, take a few deep breaths, and then go back in and edit anything that I don't particularly like about that first sew out. When I was first starting to digitize, it would take me many rounds of editing to get things the way that I wanted them. Now I can often get it kind of okay by the first one, and if you weren't me, you might not notice, but I still will do a round or two of editing on material that is as close to the final product as I can get, just to get things totally dialed into the way that I want them. And that's pretty normal for a lot of digitizers. I think most of the digitizers I talk to have pretty much the same process. So I'm talking your ears off. Let's go in and look at what this looks like in the software when I start kind of planning all of these things out. All right, so first thing I need to do is just pull up a design. And I am going to open a design. And in your designs folder that's loaded with your software, you have a graphics folder. And in here are all kinds of model or sample graphics files for you to play with. The one that I'm going to pull up right now is Earth Day. Yes, this design also exists in Stitches already, so why would I digitize it? Because it affords me a few very good things for you guys to look at and consider as we're doing this. So I'm going to open that up. Now, let's do that again real quick. I'm going to go to File, Open. Files of type, you've got all embroidery files and all graphics files right now. If you had too many files on your computer, you could change this to just all graphics or all embroidery files. If you were getting a graphic up on screen, that would I would change it to all graphics. Maybe if I was trying to sort through a lot, if you knew the name of it, you could type it in to the file name field and it would start popping up. But for the most part, that's what that's going to be. If you were looking for just any and all files, you could go to all files, but to make sure that you're going to be able to open it, I would go to all graphics or all embroidery / graphics files, and then select the one you want. and open it up. I'm just going to hit cancel because I've already opened this. All right, if you wanted to scan directly into the software, you could go to File and Scan Image if you had a scanner set up, so you were scanning off of a piece of paper or somebody's business card. Not my favorite way to go. I typically like to bring it into a graphics program so I can edit the contrast, beef up my edges, clean things up a little bit before I bring it in here, just to make my digitizing life a little bit easier. So I got it on screen. My next thing that I really need to do is scale my design. So I'm going to select the graphic file name in the graphics list. And I'm going to begin to scale my design. Now, right now, I unfortunately have my design size set to points or tenths of a millimeter, and I don't have enough coffee in me to do the math to make that work right now. So I'm going to go up to Tools, Options, and Measurement Units, and I'm going to change what my design size is listed as. Instead of points, I'm going to go ahead and move that over to inches because that's what I'm a little more familiar with. Hit Apply and OK. It didn't change down here. It will as soon as I deselect and reselect it. Now it's showing up in inches. That's going to do far better for me. And I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to type in here what I want it to be. In this case, I want it to be 3.5 inches wide, and as soon as I hit enter or move my cursor off of that, it will scale to that size. Other things that you could do, other kind of ways to scale your design or scale your element that may be helpful to you. If you knew that you had to fit within a certain hoop, what you may choose to do is show that hoop up on screen. So I'm going to left click on here to show a hoop. I'm going to right click on it to choose the hoop that I want to show. Now right now it's showing the 15 centimeter. I could take that down to the 12 centimeter, hit apply. That's a little bit tight, so if I was trying to do that, if I was trying to fit in there, I can fit within the hoop itself, but I'm definitely not fitting within that hoop limit, that dotted line. So select the vector, or pardon me, the graphic file name in the graphics list, click on a handle and drag it. Now I'm going to hold both Alt and Shift to keep it proportional. I'm just going to make sure that it falls within that dotted line. And you could even come a little bit farther out, and that would still work well. Other ways to deal with sizing something. If you knew a certain, let me hide this off screen, so I'm just going to left click on there and hide that. If you knew that, for example, the edge of this had to be however many or whatever distance, you could right click and drag across there. And right now it is 0.138 inches or 35 points. You could come in here as soon as I let go off the ruler. When I right click and drag, it's going to say what it is. You say what you want it to be. So maybe I want it to be 0.142. I don't, at this size, I would do better not in inches. Sorry, guys. Hit OK, and it will scale my design automatically. So now if I left click and drag across here, it is 1.42. And so that dimension is scaled up to match whatever I had right click and drug across. Really handy if you have a graphic that has a lot of white space around it, or if you're trying to get a specific piece in a design to match to something. All right, so I've sized my graphic. Now I need to start planning things out. All right, so I'm gonna move this over to give us a little bit more room to work. And I'm going to grab a markup tool for on screen, and let's start kind of planning this out. So the first thing that I would do, and sometimes you'll see me actually print out a design, and I'll lay some tracing paper over it, or I'll print it out very lightly, and I'll grab a marker and start just drawing all over it. I can lay a marker down and kind of pad things out and trace how I'm going through a design and see if I can do it without picking up my pencil or my marker. I can probably do it without a trim. If I have to pick it up, then yes, I have to trim. Is that the end of the world? No. But can I do it without? Maybe. With this design, let's see what we can do. So I'm going to start drawing all over the screen. I apologize ahead of time. My handwriting on screen and my drawing on screen are not nearly what it is on a piece of paper. So I'm going to do this on screen. This is an annotation program just to show up for you guys. This is not part of DesignShop. It's more just so that you can see my thought process and not me have to put a camera and show pieces of paper and me drawing. So let's go back and let's look at what would be the first thing that I would sew. Now I have this very, very large area kind of around here. Not if I don't have my pencil selected, I don't. So I have this kind of large area up here, and I could probably fill that in all in one direction, and I could do the sky first, and that would make it fall very much in the background, and I think that would work very, very well for me. So I'm going to say, you know what, yeah, I'm going to do the sky first. So I'll say, yeah, we'll do the sky. And what kind of stitch? Well, I think it would do well as a fill. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll fill that in. That's going to look great. So I have all of that filled in. Now what would I do? Typically, I would go ahead and try to attach as much of it to the backing as possible before I started doing anything else. And there are a few different ways that you could do that. So you could do the mountains next, and that would kind of fill in that little gap. Or you could do the water. I would probably do the mountains next, and I would probably do the mountains from the top down. That way I'm pushing away from things that I've sewn before. So that would be 2. That's a terrible 2, I'm sorry. That would be 3, and that would be 4. So 2, 3, and 4 are all the mountains. And what kind of stitch would that be? Well, it would depend on how long or how wide this is. So if I come across here and I click and I drag and I measure, I'm right on the edge of what's probably a good or bad idea of that kind of 60 to 70 points. So the dark one could do it, the light one could do it. The medium one, that's way too big to be a satin stitch. So my question would then become, and this is a question you'd have to ask yourself, do you want 2 mountains to be one thing and then the third mountain to be something else? I'm going to go probably not, so I'm going to go ahead and say I want those all to be fills. And then I would do the water to kind of fill everything in. So 5 would be the water. And kind of the fun thing about the water, that would be a fill. It's a little bit larger too. Fun thing about the fill is you could do it all as one stitch direction and get away with it, but what you could choose to do is do each segment separately with different stitch directions. And by changing those stitch directions, sorry, I just threw my pen across the table. By changing those stitch directions, you are changing the way that the light hits it. So you can use the exact same color of blue, but because you're changing that direction, the light's hitting it differently, and it can really start to look like those waves or different layers of kind of that water going back in space. So that could work really, really well. I'm going to very carefully pick up this pen so I don't throw it across the table again. All right, so I've got the whole area covered. I've got my sky. I've got the mountains. I've got the water. So now, do you want to do all of the outlines, or do you want to do some of the detail? So typically at this point, I would start to do the detail, and I would do the outlines last to kind of cover up any gaps or anything that doesn't look quite right, so I can hide any imperfections under that black outline. So I think at this point, I don't know which I would really do. You could do the sun or the trees. It doesn't really matter. What I would ask you to consider, so let's do the trees right now. And what I would ask you to consider is what sews first, the trunk or the tops of the trees. Now, if I sewed the tops of the trees first, what I could do is fill in the tree and then travel down under the trunk. So I could fill in the tree, travel down, travel under, come back up, and do this tree, so I could avoid a trim if I did the tops and then the trunks. However, I think doing the trunks first and then having the tops be able to kind of come down over the trunk, I think just the look of that, having the tops come over the trunk, is worth a trim to me. It's a single trim. It's not that big of a deal. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do the trunks first. And because they are thin enough, I think a satin stitch would really give you that lovely rounded effect. So you can really start to get a round tree trunk that way. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I think 6, I keep not getting my markup tool selected. I'm sorry, guys. 6 is my trunk. That's terrible handwriting. Satin. 7 is the tops. I think that would be a fill. 8, I think we're going to do the sun. So here I want you to think about it. What do you want to do? A satin or a fill or a combination? I think, like we did with the trunks and the trees, I think we could overlap them. So what I would seriously consider doing is traveling down, satining back, traveling to the next one, satining back, and going all the way through all of this, and then filling in the center of the sun, filling that in, and covering up all my satins or all my travel stitches. I think that could work really well for me. I think it would give the sun a lot of dimension. So I would do both stitch types for that. And then for the big outline, the big black outline, I would do that in satin stitches. I would be very careful how I layer things. So I would probably have the edges of the mountain outline come under the edge of the outline for the whole thing. I would probably do the same thing here. So I would extend that down. I would do the same thing with the waves. I would bring those under that a little bit and out here a little bit. Then I would cover up all those ragged edges with the top piece here. And then I would finish up with that round outer piece. And I think that would cover up a lot of any kind of odd material push, any kind of weird rough edges that I might get from any of my fills. Fills, for me, rarely have as clean of an edge as I want, so I'll typically finish those up with a satin stitch around the outside, and that cleans up a lot of designs really nicely for me. But we've gone through, we've planned everything out. We know what kind of stitch directions and stitch types we want. That doesn't mean that we can't go edit them later if we change our minds. You have that capability, totally use it. But we've got a good plan. We've thought through what we're going to do. So now all we have to do is go through, set up our properties, input those points, and then go ahead and sew it out. So you're really ready to start to really get in and start digitizing your designs now, after getting it on screen, sizing it how you want to, and planning your design out.